We'll tell you which wide receivers to play in that high-scoring Tampa Bay-Atlanta game, and we'll answer your Twitter questions all on the Week 12 edition of the Footballguys Daily Fantasy Power Grid, presented by DraftKings. John, tell us, what are the Vegas lines telling you in terms of what we should be looking for this week on the slate?
They're telling me that one of our panel members is going to be extra happy this week because for the first time in about 6 decades, the Cleveland Browns are a double-digit favorite. The Cleveland Browns are 10.5-point favorites over Miami at home. They have an implied team total of 27.5 points, which happens to be the 3rd highest team total on the slate. And I would argue it's basically even with New Orleans and Atlanta, who are both home favorites against Carolina and Tampa Bay, respectively. It's going to be an interesting week talking about players to play from Cleveland, and we can see that Devin is donning the gear. He's ready. He's drinking coffee. I'm a little afraid of where this could go.
The Browns have a little extra fight in them this week.
They have a little extra fight, but it's
a little extra helmets too.
At the top of the Vegas value chart this week, you have New Orleans at 28.3, Atlanta in a shootout game against Tampa Bay at 28, Cleveland 27.5, New England against Dallas at home 25.8, and after that it kind of falls off. So those are the big teams: New Orleans, Atlanta, Cleveland, New England, and elsewhere, it's kind of mediocre. So it'll be interesting to see what we do. There's not a whole lot of shootout games this week, but I suspect as we get through the episode, we'll talk about where we might think there could be some shootouts, and I certainly have an opinion or two on that.
Yeah, there's a couple of games with close lines that don't have 50-point totals, but they could get there. Let's talk about quarterbacks. Devin, tell us, who are you playing at quarterback this week?
There's no Lamar Jackson on this main slate this week, so thank God for that. And I say that just because he's 70% owned on FanDuel and DraftKings almost every week, and it makes
in
it
cash
difficult.
games.
Yeah, so I think there's really 2 options, and to me it's either Jameis or Matt Ryan. I just think that both of those are the safest guys on the board this week. I'm leaning towards Jameis. No, I'm not. I'm leaning towards Matt Ryan. Yeah, which if you listen to last week, I talked myself off of Josh Allen, so maybe you do want to go Jameis, but I'm going Matt Ryan. This Falcons team is favored. They seem like a more inspired team, where Tampa seems more on the downhill slide. I think that Matt Ryan is a little bit more risky than Winston, just because even when they're getting blown out, Winston is still throwing. But if you look at Tampa Bay's defense, they cut Vernon Hargreaves, and they've allowed 3 touchdowns or more in 5 of their last 6 and 4 straight. So, I mean, Jared Goff threw for 517 yards against this defense, and we all know what we think of Jared Goff is that he's not that good. So, for me, it's got to be Matt Ryan. I think that the options are there. We've seen Brian Hill and Devontae Freeman. Neither of them really excite me. He's the guy that I'm starting with, and then I'll jump back in later if some other guys aren't mentioned.
Ryan, what do you think of those guys in that high-scoring game, and who do you like this week?
Yeah, it's Matt Ryan for me there over Jameis Winston in that game. It's really Matt Ryan over everybody in cash right now, because Atlanta gains the highest ratio of their yardage via the pass, and Tampa Bay allows the highest ratio of their yardage via the pass. So you know how Atlanta's going to move it, especially with the running back situation that Devin mentioned, and Tampa Bay, you know how teams move it against them. So it lines up well there, and they're a home favorite, and Ryan is near the top of the pricing, but I think his safety and his production are worth it. Another interesting one that Devin didn't mention, given his attire selection this evening, is Baker Mayfield. So he's under 10% owned. He's under 6K on DraftKings. He's facing Miami. I should say under 10% projected to be rostered by our own Steve Buzzard. He's the overall QB9 in the last 3 weeks, quietly averaging 21.9 fantasy points a game. They're getting it together a bit, and they're a big home favorite against Miami, who we just saw Josh Allen skewer up and down the field all last week, and teams have been, exploiting Miami all year. Outside of those guys, another interesting one.
You're not doing Mayfield and Cash, are you?
No, sorry.
Okay.
It's Ryan and Cash.
Okay.
There's one cheaper one that I'll save for our other colleague over here, because I'm sure he wants to gloat about his call there last week. So at a similar price point, though, who'd have thought that we'd, for 100 more than that player, get Carson Wentz. So in the mid fives, again, I if you really need it in cash, it's maybe doable, but I don't like it because I'd rather just have Ryan. But Wentz gets Seattle, and it's really just a price play at this point. The upside we've seen from Carson Wentz in past years hasn't really been there throughout this year, but we have seen teams do very well against Seattle. We saw Wentz last week struggle a bit, but New England, Seattle, huge difference there. So that price just caught my eye, and it's something that I would look at doing in a GPP situation.
John, who do you like at quarterback this week? And I'm sure you would never gloat about any picks from last week at all.
No, that's not my style. I'll let these guys bring it up, and I'll just smile, and we all know that somebody was right. In terms of cash games, I don't hate the Ryan call, but I think I prefer Winston. Is that crazy to think that Winston's the better play this week? I just look at last week against New Orleans, who I think has a pretty good defense, and then we just go backwards. Let's look at Jameis Winston's numbers over the past, 6 to 8 weeks. 313, 358, 335, 301, 400. Oh, he had a bad game, 204 plus 2 touchdowns. 385, 380. That's dating back to week 3. It's really difficult. There's no running game. You got Ronald Jones, Peyton Barber, the other guy, I'm not even going to try to say his name.
Dare Agumbawale.
Exactly. To me, you got to go that way, and he comes at a discount to Matt Ryan. So I do have a little bit of reservation, for what it's worth, about going with Winston, because this Falcons defense looks like over the past 2 weeks it's been for real. And Matt Waldman did his top 10. He said he thinks that they've found some answers in the secondary. I'm not so sure I believe that. I think that Winston is still in play at 6,200.
Can I rebut that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
The only reason, I don't disagree with you. I think it's very, very close. But the reason I like Ryan just a little bit more is I think he has a higher upside than I think that Winston does. So I actually think that Winston may have a slightly higher floor. But with those two being, I think we can all throw it out there. Those two, maybe Russell Wilson could be a cash game play, but it's those three are really the guys that are in consideration. But for me, if half the field is split, I want the guy with slightly higher upside that's a favorite. It really comes down to that.
So I'm okay with that rationale. And I'll say that my other cash game play as of Thursday night, excuse me, I was talking a lot today, so my voice is going to be a bit rough, is Russell Wilson against Philadelphia and their pass funnel defense, 6,800. Last week, they were able to calm down Tom Brady, and I think a lot of folks are going to be off of him. This will not be a popular play, but I do have full confidence that Russell Wilson comes into Philadelphia and busts up that defense. I think he's cash game viable coming off of a bye week and 2 weeks to prep. Don't be afraid of going with Wilson if you can't really place yourself on either Winston or Ryan.
What do you think, Devin?
Wilson's a tremendous play in like a 5-man or a 3-man to give you some difference in in a 5-man contest, you could be the only guy with Russell Wilson in theory. So I think if you're playing in those types of very small GPPs, treat those kind of like cash games, but I think you can get a little bit different in going with Wilson. Philly's defense has been better as of late, but the games that they played, Brady, the wind was horrible. Mitch Trubisky the worst quarterback in the league. Josh
Mason
Allen
Rudolph disagrees.
No, Trubisky's worse. But and you know what I think of Rudolph. So just check my Twitter if you really want to know.
Their defense has not been good, by the way. I mean, they played well against New England last week, but beyond that, they beat Chicago. They gave up 31 to Buffalo, 37 to Dallas, 38 to Minnesota. They beat the Jets. They gave up 27 to Green Bay. They've not been a good defense. I think that they're probably overrated at this point because of the way these things have happened. Again, I think, I mean, we're agreeing here. I just don't want people to get away from Wilson because they gave up 10 or 17 points to Brady last week.
Yeah, I think the game that worries me more than the Brady game is they only allowed Dak to throw for 239 and a touchdown. And that was mostly because Elliott just dominated in that game. But
exactly.
So I don't think their run defense is as good as what we traditionally think. So Chris Carson could have a somewhat better performance, but we'll get into running backs in just a second.
And let us know which of these picks you like, which of these you don't like. And if you've got some other guys that you think you're playing this week, we'd love to have a conversation with you in the YouTube comments. Speaking of those running backs like Chris Carson, really the only situation I've got my eye on here has to do with Steelers running backs. It looks like James Conner will not play. It looks like Benny Snell will be back. They're playing the Bengals. Ryan, you know this division. You know the Steelers. Is there any interest here in Jalen Samuels? If not, who else you got at running back this week?
Yeah, I'm absolutely not playing Jalen Samuels. He's priced at the RB8 on this slate on DraftKings, which is absurd for a guy who's already splitting the backfield with a player named Trey Edmonds, who's an undrafted free agent. I'm not going to do it. And per Dr. Gene, Benny Snell might be back this week, and he practiced in full. And I think the team likes him quite a bit, and they better like him a little more than Trey Edmonds because they drafted him in the third round, and Trey Edmonds wasn't drafted at all. So for a guy who's already splitting a backfield with bad players to be priced that high, I'm not going to do it, especially not in any kind of cash format. Do
you think Snell's interesting?
Yes.
Probably more so than Samuels, yes.
I think Snell has 2 touchdown upside.
Yeah, I can't disagree. I mean, there were times that now the Steelers didn't really sniff the goal line a lot in the last couple of weeks, but at one point they did. Samuels came down, against the Colts in that game. Samuels got down, 6 inches short, and then the very next play they brought Edmonds in for a carry. So who's to say that that's not Snell, and he actually converts it against a lesser Cincinnati defense. So I don't disagree. I'd probably play him before I'd play Samuels. So that situation I'm completely out on. The one guy that I like the most here this week is Alvin Kamara. So they're hosting Carolina, who's a very poor run defense, kind of a reverse funnel defense. Thanks, John, for the handwritten.
There's your green black-eyed Joe. Yeah, it's like eyes crossed.
With eyelashes, too. I think that was the female black-eyed Joe. Look at those eyelashes.
Black-eyed Jane. That's pretty good.
Yeah, so hopefully anyone consuming the audio here can go check out the YouTube and look at John's awesome black-eyed Jane there, yeah. So Alvin Kamara has 10 targets in each of the last 2 games since he came back from injury. Again, it's a team that you can run on, and he's involved no matter how the script goes, even if you get one of these games where it goes sideways like it did against Atlanta a couple of weeks ago. So Kamara's my favorite guy there. Samuels is my least favorite guy on the whole slate at running back, and I'll leave a couple more. I have one more GPP play, but I'm going to save it for later perhaps.
All right, John, talk about running backs.
I think in cash, Kamara is my favorite guy for all the reasons that I think he's already mentioned. Are we going back to Miles Sanders this week in cash?
No.
I think that I am.
He's so bad.
He's not so bad.
Ryan held up the agreement. It sounds like Ryan and John are going back, and Devin is not.
He was in a good matchup.
He's good enough for 5K.
He had a bad week last week, but prior to that, the guy was averaging over 5 yards a carry. He had 3 catches, 4 catches, and that was when he was sharing opportunity with other players on the field. I think this week he bounces back. It's an interesting thing. Did you guys hear that?
No, what was that?
My air conditioning just kicked in, and when it happens, it sounds like the world is being taken over by the zombie apocalypse or something. Sorry.
San Diego is where the zombie apocalypse is starting. I just want to take notes.
I'm pretty sure I'm about to catch a flight on the way out of here, so we'll see. But I do think that Miles Sanders is interesting in both cash as well as GPPs, because I think Devin's right. There are a lot of people who are going to be like, I wasted my money on him last week. He was way over owned, and I'm not going back there. But at $5,000 against Seattle, I think he catches 3 to 5 passes and carries the ball another 12 to 15 times, which at that price point makes him definitely cash game viable. And if he maintains, where is he? I'm looking on Steve Buzzard's.
Steve has him high though. He's 22.
Well, high on FanDuel, but low on DK.
I think
he's got the opposite. 22% on DK. So on DK, if he ends up that high, I don't know that he's a great GPP play. We'll see where that ends up. But Thursday night, typically things change a bit, quite a bit from there. 2 other guys on my list right now. Le'Veon Bell against Oakland. Oakland has a pass funnel defense. They're typically pretty tough up front, but Le'Veon Bell's getting into borderline too cheap territory at 6,400. Looking across the industry at projections that I trust, he's a guy that even though he hasn't excelled this season, he hasn't scored a lot. I think he's cash game viable coming off of back-to-back games with a touchdown. Last game for cash games. And this is, I don't think you're going to hear this anywhere else, is Bo Scarborough at 4,200 against Washington. There's nothing in that backfield that is really going to compete against him. If you need to save salary this week, and I suspect you're going to, because we'll talk about this, there's not a lot of value because there aren't. I think DraftKings did a really nice job of pricing people this week. Everywhere I thought there might be value, I looked at the backup, and he was priced up accordingly. Coming off of a week that saw him with 14 touches, I think Bo Scarborough is definitely in play at 4,200 against Washington, who doesn't scare me at the defensive position. So that's kind of where I'm leaning with cash game plays. I'll talk about GPP either here or at the end of the show.
Devin, who you like at running back this week?
Yeah, I'm not playing Christian McCaffrey. He's too expensive for the matchup, so let's just get that out of the way, which opens up a lot of doors for salary. First guy I'm playing is Nick Chubb in cash. I think that there was a lot of concern that Kareem Hunt would eat into the carries, and all Chubb has done since Kareem Hunt has come back is seen 20 carries or more. He's seen 20 carries or more in 7 of his last 8 games, going up against a Miami defense that do they even want to – I mean, offensively, Miami's still having fun and putting up points. Defensively, I think they've put every starter on IR so far this year or traded them away. So Jerome Baker at linebacker is a disaster. The entire secondary from the start of the year is gone. This is a game where Nick Chubb should be the 6th 100-yard rusher against this Dolphins defense. They're allowing 4.7 yards per carry. And, realistically, the Browns should be able to do basically whatever they want. We've seen Miami teams, I don't know what the weather is going to be in Cleveland, but historically, Miami teams going up north in the cold have really struggled. So it's a game where I think Cleveland just runs the ball all day. On the opposite side of the ball, Kalen Ballage is sort of interesting.
Oh, come on.
Isn't he averaging like less than 2 yards a carry or something?
He is.
So he's due. Is that what you're saying?
As a GPP play, I don't know if I can do it in cash, but the Browns are without Larry Ogunjobi. They're without Myles Garrett. Olivier Vernon is probably looking like he's going to miss. Here's their defensive lineman. Devereaux Lawrence, who has 7 career tackles in 3 years. Chad Thomas, who has 13 tackles in 232 snaps. Chris Smith has 1 tackle on 128 snaps. They have nobody on the defensive line. So it's a scenario in which maybe it's It's probably Balaj. It could be Myles Gaskin. Patrick Laird, don't play him in cash. I'm just going to get that out of the way. I know there's questions about him. He is a career receiving back. That's what he was in Cal. That's what he's been in the league. He had zero carries last week. He's not going to be a guy who they're going to trust. His upside is kind of what we saw last week, 6 catches, 50 yards, somewhere in there. I think Balaj gets 10 to 15 touches. Maybe it's enough against his depleted line. I don't know. It's a way to save salary.
Can I say something funny?
Yeah.
Kalen Balaj is averaging fewer yards per reception than like an average running back averages per carry. And he's averaging half that many. That's 3.84 yards per reception. And he's averaging half that many yards per carry. I love the case of injured players. And Devin, everybody on this show knows that you are so much better at identifying matchups and players that are hurt and defensive players, because we do not talk about defensive players. I don't research them, to be completely honest, other than reading the stuff that you and the team put together. But man, this guy's bad. He's just bad.
But so are the defensive linemen that I just named, right?
All right, but we've also mentioned, right, I mentioned Baker Mayfield, but you mentioned Nick Chubb. So if Cleveland scores any points in this game like they're expected to, who's to say that Kalen Balaj even has the game script to run against these guys, right? So
it's fair, but I'm not playing him in cash, I guess is my point. So
I know, but boy, but upside in GPP doesn't seem like it's all there either.
Yeah.
So.
And then one more guy. So Derrick Henry is incredibly interesting, especially on FanDuel. So this Jacksonville rush defense has surprisingly just fallen apart as of late. So they allowed, Jonathan Williams and Marlon Mack last week to both go over 100 yards. And then the week before that, I believe they allowed Carlos Hyde for 160 yards. So that's 3 running backs in the last 2 weeks that have ran for over 100 yards. Derrick Henry is a very downhill runner. I think that this is a game where they're gonna test this Jacksonville defense and see what they have. So he's a very interesting play, especially on FanDuel. I don't like him as much on DraftKings simply because of the reception upside that he doesn't possess. And then Le'Veon Bell, I can't do it. I know the matchup's good, but if his name was John Smith, none of us would be paying $6,600 for him. He's not the same guy as he was in Pittsburgh. I hate to break it to everybody.
John, 2 guys I haven't heard mentioned yet that it looks like Steve Buzzard feels like will be fairly highly owned. Leonard Fournette and Brian Hill. What do you think of these guys, or is there any other guys that are on your list?
Yeah, so Fournette's always interesting, right? Because he continues to get a lot of action. Last week, I think, was his season low in terms of touches. He had only 15 touches last week, but 7 of those, if you're playing on DraftKings, 7 of those came through the air. And over the past 3 weeks that they played, 7 catches, 5 catches, 7 catches. And that definitely keeps him in play in terms of cash games, because he brings a floor that is reasonable, because behind him you've got Armstead and nobody. And Armstead plays about 15% of the snaps or something. Brian Hill is scary to me. I think at this point he's going to be X'd out of my tournament rosters this week, because we didn't see a whole lot last week in a much better matchup. We saw them mix in some other guys. And, oh, by the way, Tampa Bay is pretty good against the run. If you're going to beat Tampa Bay, it goes through the air.
Tampa's the best against the run in the league.
Exactly. And so that goes back to what we were talking about in terms of targeting Matt Ryan in the passing game. So I think Brian Hill, you got to get away from him. His price went up a little bit this week despite what he did. Is that not true? He's
still pretty cheap, but yeah.
I think the matchup last week again in New Orleans wasn't a good one either. But
no, they were Carolina.
Yeah, it was Carolina, but 2 weeks ago
I'm looking
was
at Devontae. Yeah, you're right.
Come on, John, get the games right.
That's why I'm drinking coffee. I'm trying to wake up.
I'll take that if I were you. Over the past 2 weeks, since becoming the quote featured back in Atlanta, Brian Hill has 45 carries for 91 yards, and Kalen Balaj would be offended by that. So I don't know. Nothing I like there. In terms of GPP selections, I do like the Derrick Henry selection against Jacksonville, so I won't go any further there. Saquon Barkley against Chicago. If the Giants are ever going to do anything, Saquon Barkley at 7,900 is as cheap as you're going to see. This is as discounted as the guy can be. 7,900 against Chicago. I think, and I looked at his ownership earlier, less than 10%, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, well,
on DraftKings,
9.9 on DraftKings.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, I was right. So I think that he is very interesting against Chicago for a reason I'll talk about in just in a little bit throughout the show. And then, what do we think about Philip Lindsay against Buffalo? Last week they came. Oh Lord,
Ryan with the red black eye, Joe.
Come on, we're brothers. Normally it's.
I'll tell you why after you're done.
Devin. Okay. We got late word on Sunday that Lindsay was going to be the featured back, and indeed he got about 2/3 of the touches out of that backfield. And we got a Buffalo defense that is a reverse funnel defense in the sense that they're really good in their secondary, really good, but they have not done much at all against the rush. In fact, I think they're 27th DVOA against the rush, 9th DVOA against the pass. And they got a quarterback who hasn't been doing anything. So if they're going to score points, it probably is going to be through the ground. And if Denver's telling us it's going to be Lindsay once again, I'm happy to take him at low ownership and 5,200 against Buffalo.
Ryan, rebuttal?
Yeah, so it's good that Lindsay is now the featured guy. I mean, I think he's the more dynamic player and everything, right? So, but one thing I noticed looking when I was writing trend spotting this week, so there was 2 notable changes to the Denver passing game here recently, the Emmanuel Sanders trade and Brandon Allen being named starter. So going back weeks 1 through 7, Denver running backs saw 27% of the team's targets. Now they're only seeing 20% of the team targets. And also since week 8, Lindsay's averaging 12.4 PPR points. So that week 8's the same week, first week post Sanders trade. So 12.4 PPR a game, 0 RB1 finishes, 2 RB2 finishes, and 1 RB3 or worse. And Royce Freeman went the same way. So he's half as many PPR points, just 1 RB2 finish and 2 RB3 or worse. So those guys have both gone way, way down at the expense mostly of Noah Fant, who's seeing 85% of the snaps compared to 69% before that, and 27% of the team's targets compared to 11 before that. So the offensive philosophy has changed. And if you are going to beat Buffalo, I mean, the case you laid out, John, is absolutely right. I will agree with that. You're going to do it on the ground. But, much of Lindsay's value last year in this was in the air as well. So I just don't know that I see him as a 20-plus, 25 carry kind of running back. If he does get that, there's a great chance he gets to that 100 yards and that bonus on DraftKings. But I just don't know that that's the way, or he's the guy to beat Buffalo in the way that you can beat Buffalo.
I'm not sure. I'm going to counter your counter and say
Redirect.
that last year he had more than 4 receptions one time. So I'm not so sure that he's a critical part of that passing game. I think that the offense is learning how to deal without the players that you've referenced, and I'm still you didn't talk me off of him. So
all right, agree to disagree. Yeah. Devin, you got one last guy before we move on to receivers?
Ezekiel Elliott, 7,500 on DraftKings. We've seen downhill runners against New England have success. Frank Gore ran for over 100. Nick Chubb ran for over 100, and Mark Ingram ran for over 100. I think Elliott is a downhill guy that a lot of people will look at the overall stats of New England and be off of it, but a lot of that has been game script dependent. So on a per carry basis, they are not nearly as good as what they otherwise appear if you just look at their overall per game numbers. So I think that it's a bit of a sneaky play against a defense that's 23rd in the NFL with 4.6 yards per carry.
And that would be a GPP play?
Yeah, they play a lot of dime defense too. That's pretty much their base set, which is one linebacker on the field. So, and then Duron Harmon or Patrick Chung comes down to the linebacker position. So I think that Elliott could have success there. Travis Frederick needs to play better though at center. I know he was out last year, but he's struggling.
All right, hit subscribe, hit that little bell, give us a thumbs up, and let's talk about some wide receivers. There's a few guys I'm looking at here, mainly the Patriots receivers and the Steelers receivers are a bit nicked up. We've got Philip Dorsett. Looks like he could play this week. He got in a limited practice on Thursday, but it looks like Mohamed Sanu is going to sit this one out with an ankle injury. Then on Pittsburgh, you've got Juju Smith-Schuster, looks unlikely to play in this game.
Who cares?
And Deontay Johnson, also for the Steelers, looks like he will play. Then on the other side of that game in Cincinnati, looks like Auden Tate will not be playing. So both sides of the ball in that Pittsburgh-Cincinnati game, the receivers are nicked up. John, let's talk to you first about receivers. Any
Real
of those
quick.
injuries? Yeah.
FanDuel fixture pricing. John Brown, DJ Moore, 65 and 6,400. It's ridiculous. It's every week. They don't fix it.
Noted.
What's Cortland Sutton over there? Is he the same?
He's 68, so they bumped him up a little bit. But, guys, you're having guys who are 50% owned every single week in cash. Let's stop this madness.
Well, I mean, let's be real. You know, those of us who've been playing for whatever, 5, 6, 7 years, there was a time when FanDuel's prices were way tighter, and they changed their philosophy at some point. What was it? Maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. And they're just like, let's just make everything 20 to 25% lower across the board. And
but it's these
changed
exact same three guys that they've been underpriced every single week this year.
Yeah, I hear you. I agree. All right, John, what do you think?
I'm glad you came to me first because I don't have a lot of strong opinions at cash here. I think you can go with Michael Thomas, 9,300 against Carolina. The guy has been just lights out all year. He's having a career year. If you're going to spend up at the position, he's the guy. Julio against Tampa Bay is probably the chalk at the position. He's going to cost you 8,000 though, and you're going to have to find value elsewhere. And then on the lower end, and it's not super low, Devontae Parker against Cleveland. If everything we're talking about is right, we're going to see a lot of Cleveland scoring, and Miami on the back end is going to have to throw the ball. Devontae Parker coming off of a big week last week. He's probably the guy you want to have therein. So I'll stop there for cash. Maybe I come back for GPP after the other guys have spoken.
Sure. Devin, you're in a feisty mood about receivers. It sounds like, well, okay. Who do you like more, DJ Moore or DJ Chark?
You mean John Brown?
Which DJ do you like more?
I like DJ Chark this week.
DJ Chark. Yes, I just wanted you to say that.
I do like DJ Moore as well, but
I have them both written down.
Yeah, is Marshawn Lattimore playing? I don't know. Check his status. If he's playing, I do like Chark a little bit better. Anyway, my top guy this week is Odell Beckham. And the reason for that is Miami has a speed problem on their defense ever since they put Xavier Howard and they put both of their safeties on IR this week. I think it's Bobby McCain and Rashad Jones. Rashad Jones is a Pro Bowler, but they've struggled against speed guys. So John Brown, 9 for 137 and 2 touchdowns last week. Juju Smith-Schuster, we can debate him, but he is fast. 5 for 103 and a touchdown. John Brown again, 5 for 83 and a touchdown. Terry McLaurin, who's a speedster, 4 for 102 touchdowns. Amari Cooper, 6 for 88 and 2 touchdowns. Basically every speed receiver. Oh, Marquise Brown, 4 for 147 and 2 touchdowns. Every 4-4-5 guy and under, they've given up close to 100 yards and 1.5 touchdowns. Odell Beckham is that guy. Jarvis Landry's not the speed guy. Jarvis Landry's role kind of is what it is. He's going to have 6 for 70 probably, maybe score a touchdown. This is the week that Odell Beckham gets right. I think it's a week that they're going to exploit his speed against this defense, and we've been waiting for it. We haven't really talked about Beckham a lot this year just because the matchups that they seem to have every week have been terrible. They've had probably the hardest passing schedule of the year. But this is the week where I think the Browns come out and do whatever they want, and they need to make this guy happy. So it's a little bit narrative-y, but the data of speed receivers does support it.
And against Miami, you can play both Chubb and Odell Beckham in cash?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's Miami.
They're going to score 30.
John says no. Yeah, do you think they're going to score 30, and it's going to be mostly those two guys?
The Browns funnel is like four guys. It's Chubb, Hunt, a little bit of Hunt, Beckham, and Landry. So it's not.
You got
it's not
David
that
Njoku coming back this week.
He's not going to see that many. I mean, they're going to ease him back in.
Yeah, I'm just messing with you.
And then
he's going to score 2 touchdowns. Watch, but
well, the one time it was Ricky Seals-Jones, but I wouldn't rely on that again.
No,
right. But the Browns funnel is very small as far as overall targets. So
yeah, I buy that. And to go back to your other question about DJ Moore, Marcus Lattimore did not practice on Wednesday or Thursday. So
then I like Moore more than Chark.
Ah, there you go. Yeah. Okay.
And then can we talk about Tampa and Atlanta real quick?
We should
is Julio the guy?
In cash, if you can afford him, yeah.
Is Mike Evans at $700 cheaper?
Is it?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Is it weird that I prefer Calvin Ridley this week?
That's weird.
To Julio?
That is coming from you. That's really weird.
I'm just saying. He's cheaper, and Steve has him projected at a much lower ownership. So I think his price is higher than it's ever been. I think for him, at least that I can recall. But it's still $1,500 less than Julio. So something to think about. But
I think I prefer Evans over Godwin and Julio.
Agreed.
Simply because I think Evans gets true font where I think Godwin out of the slot will likely be doubled for a large portion of the game.
Yeah, and you think Evans can win the one-on-one matchup there?
I do. Trufant's been okay, but he hasn't. I mean, he struggled last week mightily against DJ Moore. I mean, he had 7 tackles for a corner, which is a lot. So
yeah,
I think that Trufant is no longer. I mean, he's 30. He's almost 30. So he's kind of he's not the elite guy he once was.
Ryan, what do you think about you're thinking maybe Ridley is a play this week?
I am. And as for the Tampa guys, I mean, I know that this is a decision every week because of their narrow target distribution, their similar pricing, they both have great skill sets. I think, from just a raw points cash safety standpoint, it's Mike Evans. If you look at Chris Godwin, weeks 1 through 7, Chris Godwin was the overall wide receiver 1 in fantasy points per game. 24 points. He's since then he's 12.8 a game, and he's the wide receiver 33. So he has really fallen off there. Evans, meanwhile, was wide receiver 13 in that early stretch, and he's now wide receiver 2 in the last 4 weeks. So I like Evans, and the matchup situation Devin pointed out just makes that even better. However, if you're looking at Steve's percentages, you've got almost a 2x ownership projection here with Evans at 19.9 and Godwin at 11.7. So, from a GPP leverage standpoint, they're $100 different in price. And so is Evans 2 times more likely to get there? I don't know, maybe not. So it might just be cash Evans and GPP Godwin, and that you can kind of split things up that way.
Yeah, I can hear that. John, what do you think about that logic, and who else do you want to mention?
I'm fine with Evans. I think Evans is a superior wide receiver over Godwin. No issues with it. For me, GPP selections, Allen Robinson against the Giants at 6,500. I think if Allen Robinson was playing on any other team, he'd be at least $1,000 more. And certainly that has a lot to do with quarterback play. But he's going against the Giants this week. And the Giants I'll talk about. Maybe I'll close with the Giants tonight. But that suffice it to say that secondary is not good. So I really like that. Love the OBJ call. What about Demaryius Thomas, 3,800 against Oakland? Oakland's pass funnel defense. I think this is a good time for him to zone. The guy has been targeted quite a bit in this offense. I know he's not the player that he was when he was in Denver, but this is a situation where at some point he's going to get into the end zone. He continues to be heavily targeted in this offense. He has not scored for the entire season. I'm looking it up as I'm talking. Has not scored the entire season, and yet he has been targeted 47 times, which is just behind Robbie Anderson. So at 3,800, I'm happy to go with him against a pass funnel defense in Oakland, especially on a week where value is hard to come by it. And he can give me that salary relief.
Any other receivers anybody wants to mention before we move on?
Yeah, I got two.
All right, hit me.
Devontae Parker. How is Miami going to move the ball?
Yeah.
Preston Williams is out. Devontae Parker is kind of back-to-back 100-yard weeks.
I mentioned him as a cash game play this week. I think he's solid as a cash game play.
They're 7 for 135 last week. I think he's a great cash game play. And then Tyler Boyd, I think, is a GPP play. We mentioned that Auden Tate is out. How is Cincinnati going to move the ball? So I like guys who are going to get targets. Tyler Boyd has to get targets simply because there's nobody else in that offense. Who's the other guy? Alex Erickson?
Right. John gave you the green-eyed Jane. He agrees as well.
One last one here.
Yep.
How about DK Metcalf? So we've got
he's on my list too.
John talked about Russ Wilson earlier. Tyler Lockett is expected to play, but he's kind of nicked up, and Metcalf has seen a significant amount of end zone and red zone targets this year. So there's touchdown upside. There's multiple touchdown upside. Right now, Steve has him under 2% in a really good.
I have Metcalf on my GPP list, but he was the one guy that I did not mention on my list. So I'm totally on board with that. I think he outclasses Ronald Darby in both talent as well as size and speed. So
I like him better if Lockett plays.
Yeah.
Potentially.
And
if Lockett doesn't play, Josh Gordon's interesting.
Yeah, maybe. But Metcalf will be on – I think Metcalf will be on fewer rosters if Lockett does play. So I like that point too.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about tight ends. Didn't really have any notes here other than David Njoku coming back. Devin, who do you like at tight end this week?
Yeah, it's a little bit tough. The question is whether you spend up or not. And I think that this is a week you probably can. But with that said, Greg Olsen's price is still fairly affordable at 4,100.
Yeah.
And the guy, he's not great, but he has 17 points and 10.7 over the last 2 weeks, which at 4,100 is a way to save salary. If you're not doing that, do we go to Darren Waller? I mean, the Raiders are not really going to have a lot of success running the ball against the Jets, who have one of the best run defenses in football. Waller is a guy who continues to see targets, and we saw him last week with 7. I can't trust Zach Ertz. I maybe you guys can, but I can't do it.
Ryan, who do you like at tight end?
Ertz is in play for GPPs, right? As long as, if Alshon Jeffrey and Nelson Aguilar are both active, they're going to run less 12 sets, and Ertz becomes really interesting. But when they're running a lot of dual tight end sets, that hurts Ertz upside. So I get it, but if it depends on what his ownership's going to be, that really drives a lot of my decision making for GPPs. But I do love the Waller call. If you have the money, he's the way to go this week. He's the class at the tight end position on the main slate. But I don't know that you have the money this week. That's where I'm really struggling to get there. And I'm looking at a very pedestrian face here in Ryan and wondering whether or not is Vance McDonald, is he cash game viable this week? Because
but I can tell you why I was going to mention Vance McDonald if you
let's talk about it, because he's a guy that it's either him or Mike Gesicki at that $3,500 price range that I'm looking at cash games this week, because I don't want to spend any money. There's Kings is really tightening up things, and I don't want to spend money at a highly volatile position.
Yeah, so two quick things, right? So if you have 200 more, just play Dallas Goedert at 3,700. Last 2 games, he's 80% of the snaps, 48% of them are from the slot, and he's running a route on 75% of the team's dropbacks. 8th in tight end targets. I mean, he's the tight end 2 on his own team, but he's a tight end 1 in fantasy football.
John gave you the black-eyed bald jack for that one.
That's fine. I'd rather play Goddard than McDonald, but here is the case for McDonald this week. So we mentioned the injuries to the Steelers passing game. The team is lacking pass catchers. I don't know what they were doing last Thursday by not targeting McDonald and not having Jalen Samuels on the field after their entire wide receiver core was hurt to the point that Johnny Holton was the wide receiver 2 and a player that I write the preseason reports for the Steelers. I had never heard of Tevin Smith, and he was on the field. So why Vance McDonald wasn't getting targeted? Maybe with a week and a half to plan, they'll work some routes in for Vance McDonald here. Since he's an interesting matchup, but tight end matchups are super noisy. So since he's given up a tight end 1 result in 3 of the last 5 games, 2 of those were to Baltimore, who uses Mark Andrews a lot, and 1 was to Oakland, who has Darren Waller. The other 2, they allowed tight end 28 performance to Jacksonville and 25 to the Rams. Yeah. Those teams don't use tight ends. So it's really weird, and tight end matchups are noisy. So what I like to do with tight ends is the offensive team going to use them, and then we start thinking about it. So that's why McDonald is, I think, GPP viable, but I can't get there in cash. I still like Goddard better. I think the floor is better.
John, why do you hate Goddard so much?
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're not going to run
the Eagles.
No. I mean,
he's a Cowboys fan.
Is Alshon Jeffrey going to play this week? Because if he is, Goddard's not going to be on the field. And Jeffrey's practicing as far as I can remember. So, look, I mean, just go back and correlate snaps to playing percentage in terms of rating them against one another. I'm pulling it up, too. I know we're all doing the same thing.
Yeah. He practiced again on Thursday, yeah.
He's been playing. He has 74% of the snaps. 70% of the snaps or more in 5 of his last 6. And if you allow me to round up from 69%, it's 6 of the last 7 games. Surely Jeffrey hasn't been hurt that
I want
to
say a really bad joke right now, but I
know.
won't.
I already did.
Not appropriate for this show.
It's a family gig.
Yeah.
And he has at least 5 targets in 5 of his last 6 games. So that's more than Vance McDonald.
But McDonald had a farm and saying E-I-E-I-O.
Oh, Jesus.
He does have that going for him. Before we derail to children's nursery rhymes.
I have one more GPP guy.
Noah Fant, we know.
No, it's not Noah Fant this week. I want to because I'm such a volume guy. Similar to your analysis earlier of I like guys that get targets, but I'm not going to mention Noah Fant. I'm going to mention Ryan Griffin from the Jets. So Oakland has allowed 3 tight end 1 performances in their last 5 games. Only the Chargers and Cincinnati failed, and those are not elite tight end teams. 90% of the snaps, 17% of the team targets in the last 3 games. He has 3 touchdowns in the last 3 games. And Oakland allows 23.5% of their targets to tight ends, which is the 7th highest. And Steve has him at 3%, which I think that's because his price is $4,200. That just seems like a lot for Ryan Griffin, but it's not if you look at the production and matchup.
I like it. Devin, you got one more tight end you want to mention?
Nope.
John, one more tight end?
We're not going to talk about Noah Fant after he brought him up.
I mean, Noah Fant's a fine GPP play. He's a deep threat that, I mean, he can get behind the defense, and he's at 3,900 and at 5,100 on FanDuel. He's a good price for what he's been doing of late and the upside that he does possess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the point, right? With Allen at quarterback, they've been using him more. He's been getting more and more targets every week. You can't ignore Noah Fant anymore. So at 3,900, I think you have to consider him for GPPs.
Excellent. Let's talk about defenses. Maybe you guys see an obvious path here at defense, but it looks a little bit mishmash depending on the site.
Cincinnati Bengals, baby.
You're playing the Bengals against the Steelers?
$2,100 on DraftKings. That's how you save money.
Because they're a road underdog and things. I mean, they're a home underdog, and weird things can happen with that.
Mason Rudolph is not a good quarterback. They don't have Marquise Pouncey. That's probably going to lead to one center quarterback fumble.
My notes say, have you seen Mason Rudolph play football?
He threw 4 picks to the Browns. Like, come on.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Are you
And
on
he's
board with
kind
that
of a
too,
not
Ryan?
nice guy. Check my Twitter.
Yeah. Devin has some opinions. Ryan, do you agree with that take against your Steelers there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Have you seen Mason Rudolph play football?
Right.
I looked at the defenses this week, and I was, unpleasantly surprised, I should say, that there was no sub $2,000 defenses. That's been so much fun. So 2,100 is second to the bottom there with Cincy, and I looked and just said, sure, why not? It's Mason Rudolph in a road game. So again, I came out. I think I said this last week, but or I wrote it at least. But he had played one road game since week 3, or road game ever. The Steelers had played one since week 3. He had played one ever. And then he went on the road against Cleveland, and it was an abomination. So who's to say that that's not going to happen again? And even if he improves and throws 2 interceptions this time and fumbles once, as Devin mentioned, then since he still pays. So that's kind of where I'm starting in cash. But if you wanted to go up at the high end, I mean, Cleveland's obviously a good call if you just look at pure home favorite playing a bad team with overly aggressive quarterback. I just don't know that there's enough money there to get there, but from a raw projection standpoint, they'd probably be my highest team.
If you could guarantee me Josh Rosen would play, I'd be all over Cleveland. But
True.
It seems like Cleveland's a little bit better priced on FanDuel than they are on DraftKings as well.
Yeah, on FanDuel, I'm playing Washington at $3K.
Yeah.
Against Jeff Driscoll. At home. Yeah. $3K minimum price. Sign me up all day.
Yeah, that's a good price on FanDuel.
Agreed.
Yep.
John, any other thoughts to add on defenses?
I don't know what the guys said because my batteries died as we were
Well, that's
going.
okay. You don't listen to them anyway.
We said play the Bengals.
The Bengals, the Redskins.
The Browns are too expensive.
What about the Bills? Did you guys talk about the Bills?
No, tell us about the Bills.
The Bills at 3,400 against Denver. Braden Allen hasn't done anything that really impressed me, and they're at home. In a time of year where Buffalo seems to come alive, I kind of like them. So if you've got it, if you got the cash, that's where you go this week. Although I do agree with Devin, if you're on FanDuel and the skins are that cheap going against Detroit and Jeff Driscoll, who somebody recommended last week when he's scored a bunch of points. If you want to do that this week and go against the same guy, I'm okay with that. I will say that if you want to go with the Falcons this week, their defense and GPPs only, they have been excellent for 2 weeks straight against pretty good teams. And this week, everybody's going to be on Tampa Bay. So if you want to just really differentiate yourself, you're going to pay up for them because they're 3,500 and nobody's going to have them. But if you love football, guys, check out what Matt Waldman had to say about the Atlanta Falcons defense and why he thinks they're for real moving forward into the end of the season. It doesn't say a lot about their offense, but it certainly says a lot about their defense. I think for GPPs, I'm going to be above the field on them this weekend.
Right on. Let's talk about stacks. Ryan, who are you stacking this week?
Yeah, so I didn't get to go through a couple of my receivers, so I'll use this opportunity, even though they're both good receivers with maybe not good quarterbacks. But we talked about the DJs, right? So I had DJ Chark on the list here. So mixing DJ Chark and Nick Foles, the report came back instantly last week. Foles went for almost 300. Chark was the only guy to really do anything of note there. DJ Chark's the overall wide receiver 5 on the season and over the last 4 weeks. So it's been all season long with DJ Chark. It's just wild. I can't believe it. And Tennessee is 22nd in pass DVOA and 4th in run DVOA. So that 18 spot differential is the 3rd largest pass funnel delta. And Chark is also tied for 1st in the NFL in targets in the last 4 weeks from 2 different quarterbacks. So they're using him and he's producing. As for DJ Moore and Kyle Allen, I like DJ Moore by himself better, but here's the reason why both DJs are on the list. So last 4 weeks, he's fourth in targets, and he's only one of 5 wide receivers in the NFL with more than 30% of his team's total targets. So you could do worse than playing the DJs this week. Devin mentioned Mayfield and Beckham. I also like Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf. And then just the pure GPP standpoint, paying up to be contrarian. How about Russell Wilson and Jacob Hollister? So Hollister had 10 targets last week, played 80% of the snaps 2 weeks ago and 78% last week. They have nobody else at tight end. They just put Ed Dixon, who they weren't even using, on IR. I bet them and the Steelers wish they hadn't made the Nick Vannett trade because the Steelers have no more draft picks for the rest of time. So Jacob Hollister and Russell Wilson is another one. He's 4,300 on DraftKings, which is so absurd to see Jacob Hollister priced that high. I don't think anyone's going to click it.
John, who are you stacking this week?
I think you can go Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. That's going to be the chalk. If you want a chalky one, that's the one I would go with.
I mean, that's a cash game stack. I mean, you could stack those guys in cash.
It's a cash plus stack, and if you're in top 100 where top 10 pays, I think that's something you can do. Baker Mayfield, for the first time all season, you're going to hear me talk about that guy. Baker Mayfield with OBJ. I think this is a situation where OBJ can actually do a lot. And Devin's talked about why. I love all of the Chicago Bears receivers this week. That includes Anthony Miller. That includes Taylor Gabriel. That includes Allen Robinson, which really makes me think, the
problem is you have to stack Trubisky.
That's what I was saying. You waited to bring these guys up in the stack section.
It is.
The Giants secondary might be the worst secondary in the league.
So it's worst against worst then, is what you're saying. Worst quarterback against worst secondary.
And so what's worse of those two things, right? And I thought this, and I just Pro Football Focus, go over there, check out their wide receiver cornerback matchups, and I just sorted on advantage. It's the first time as long as I've been doing this thing where the top 3 are all against the same team. That's how bad the Giants are.
Wow.
Allen Robinson has the highest. Anthony Miller has the second highest. Taylor Gabriel has the third highest. 43%, 37%, 30%. Not that I want to be giving away all of paid content from Pro Football Focus, but let's be transparent here. This is a really good matchup for Mitch Trubisky and his receivers, especially when David Montgomery hasn't been doing much of late. I think it's a super great spot for him. The last thing I'll mention is I think you could do a kind of a reverse stack this week with Bo Scarborough and the Detroit Lions defense against Dwayne Haskins, who I don't think is a good NFL quarterback this week. You could go ahead and just run that out. It's going to be completely contrarian. I'm not suggesting you do it in the small GPP, but in something like the Millionaire Maker, it makes a lot of sense to me because you can spend up elsewhere, and both of them have extremely high upside in those respective matchups.
I like it. Devin, what do you think?
I'll go really quickly. I've mentioned quite a few throughout the show, but let's go with Ryan Fitzpatrick, Devontae Parker, and Odell Beckham.
Interesting. Gotcha.
And this game could shoot out if you give Ryan Fitzpatrick enough time, he's a good enough quarterback that he can take advantage of the Browns secondary.
Right on.
And I mentioned how few tackles the Browns defensive line has.
Yep. There you go. All right. Parting thoughts, words of wisdom, any guys that you didn't get a chance to mention, who maybe mention an article that over at footballguys.com. What do you think, Devin? What are your parting thoughts?
Real quick. So, the last 2 weeks have kind of been negative on cash just because McCaffrey's been in great spots and Lamar Jackson's on the slate and Michael Thomas has been on it in fantastic spots. This is a better cash week. I'm going to be playing a lot of head-to-heads. I don't really play 50-50s, which I think most people who followed this show know, just because the 50-50 cash lines have been as high, if not higher, than some of the GPP cash lines this season. So, in really the past couple of seasons. you're playing against all the Sharks if you're playing in the 50-50s, and I just avoid it. I pick and choose my spots for head-to-heads, and you get diversification that way as well.
I like it. Ryan, parting thoughts?
Yeah, one last guy I didn't mention, and this is sort of, again, a little leverage against the Phillip Lindsay play that John had earlier. You can make the exact same lineup. In fact, I'll probably read John's article as I always do, pick and choose, and find, instead of Phillip Lindsay's, $5,300 to spend, I'll find the same $5,300 to put on James White this week. New England targets their running backs at the second highest rate in the league. In Dallas, the defense, running backs are targeted against them at the sixth highest rate in the league. I think New England wants to get that pass offense going. You heard a lot of, it's very narrative streety here, but what are GPP plays if not based in some sort of
Sony Michel sucks.
Guessing? That too. But, you heard Tom Brady come out at the end of last week basically saying our defense is doing it for us. We have to only be opportunistic. And I just don't think he means that. I think he wants to go out and have a great game and get that offense back going again. So James White is third in targets and fourth in receiving yards among running backs. He's 43rd in total touchdowns. He's getting the volume. I think there's going to be enhanced passing game volume, and he just needs to score. The one last note, I like to plug an article every now and again, and I usually do that for an individual, but I sell short our entire staff when I do that. So it's worth looking at our staff consensus pieces here for all of our subscribers, and it's a reason to subscribe if you don't. We have Wisdom of the Staff, where we ask kind of slate-specific questions every week, and then we have consensus rankings, where we have a number of our staffers go through, and that feature aggregates all the rankings, and so you get to see who we all like the best. It's a really good groupthink exercise from a lot of smart people.
It's one of the advantages we have as a staff of like 60 people. We put together a lot of sort of consensus kind of and roundtables kind of perspectives. John, parting thoughts?
Parting thoughts. I'll return to Twitter. We've had a couple Twitter question answer things going on over the past few weeks, started by Devin. I think it's an interesting way to address some things that maybe people are thinking about. So one was Chris Hesse or Hess. He asked, what's the strategy if you don't like the late games? Is it better to fade them in terms of the late slate or just play 1 p.m. only? I have a strong opinion here, but I'll pass it off to you guys first.
Play the full slate.
Yeah. If you don't like those other games and you think that the players in them aren't going to do well, then you better have them in your slate so that everyone else can play them instead of you playing them. So play that full slate.
Yeah, you're expanding your playing pool there, Chris. So expand the player pool that allows your opponents more opportunity to miss on those players, and you, if you feel strongly about it, you're going to not go after them. So that's the way to go there. Play the entire slate. And then some guy, I don't know if you guys ever heard of this guy. His name's Steve Buzzard. Steve Buzzard asked, I'm trying to find it. I don't know if you guys have heard of this guy, but he asked, after busting last week, does Tom Brady have enough upside to win a GPP against the Dallas Cowboys? What do you guys think?
Well, Buzzard hates Brady, so he's trying to goad us into this. And I said goad on purpose, Steve. Yes, he does.
I responded back this week or ever because I know Steve doesn't like Tom Brady. So
I wouldn't go out and target Brady, but
yeah.
Does he have upside? Yeah, of course he does.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually feel pretty strongly about this. Last week, Tom Brady, much to my chagrin, was my cover boy for tips and picks. I thought he was a great selection last week, and he definitely let me get down against the Eagles' pass-falling defense, the entire offense when he put up 17 points coming off of bye week. I like them a lot this week. Tom Brady right now at 6% on that same Steve Buzzard's projections. For those of you who don't know, Steve's a pretty good DFS player. Google his name and you'll find out. I love this game. I really, really do like this game. The New England Patriots over the course of the season, in terms of neutral pace, they're the fastest team in the NFL in terms of snaps. And if they get ahead, as Vegas projects, I think that Dak Prescott throws the ball a lot. I love this game to go back and forth. If you're stacking, and we already went through stacks, I really love this game. You can stack it up. You can go any number of ways. So, yes, Steve, stack up Tom Brady, I think that you're on the right track.
Right on. Be sure to check out all of our content over at footballguys.com. We'll be back next Wednesday with a special double episode for Thanksgiving. Just like last year, we're going to do an episode with the 3-game slate for Thanksgiving as well as the main slate. So we'll kind of post 2 episodes on Wednesday next week as a special Thanksgiving treat for all of you folks who have supported us through the first 12 weeks. So on behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Ryan Hester, I am Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.